The blood pounding in Naomi Preston's ears almost drowned out the fiddle music as she pressed herself against the wall of the Ellsworth Town Hall, wishing she could disappear into the rough-hewn planks behind her. It was June 1882 in Kansas, and the Saturday night dance was in full swing, couples twirling across the floor while she stood alone, her considerable frame hidden as much as possible in the shadows. She had spent 3 weeks sewing the deep blue calico dress she wore, her skilled fingers creating perfect seams and delicate gathering at the waist, but no amount of expert tailoring could change what she saw in people's eyes when they looked at her. "Look at her standing there like a stuffed sausage," came the cruel whisper from Clara Hendricks, loud enough to carry. Clara's friends tittered behind their fans, their slim figures encased in the latest fashions that Naomi herself had sewn. The irony was not lost on her. She made beautiful things for beautiful people, and they paid her well, then mocked her when they thought she could not hear. Sometimes even when they knew she could. Naomi's hands trembled as she clutched her reticule, fighting the burning sensation behind her eyes. She was 23 years old, had lived in Ellsworth for 5 years since her mother's death, and had built a successful dressmaking business from nothing. Her hands could create magic with needle and thread, transforming plain fabric into works of art. But none of that mattered at moments like this, when she felt reduced to nothing more than her size, her body a source of entertainment for others. "I heard she ate an entire pie by herself last week," another voice joined in. Margaret Sullivan this time, wearing the rose-colored gown Naomi had finished just yesterday. The stitching on that bodice had taken hours, each tiny stitch perfect and even. Naomi had pricked her finger twice getting the fit exactly right around Margaret's narrow waist. "Well, she certainly looks like she did," Clara responded, and the laughter grew louder. Naomi felt her face flush hot despite the cool evening breeze coming through the open windows. She should not have come. She had known it would be like this, yet some foolish part of her had hoped that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. She had imagined swirling across the floor, feeling light and graceful, her dress floating around her as strong arms guided her through the steps. The reality was standing against the wall, trying to take up as little space as possible, becoming a target for the cruelty of women whose wardrobes she created. The decision formed quickly. She would leave, slip out the side door, walk the 3 blocks back to her small house behind the dress shop. She would take off this dress she had poured her heart into and fold it carefully away, probably never to wear it again. Tomorrow she would go back to being the seamstress, the invisible woman behind the creations, the skilled hands that made others beautiful. She had just pushed away from the wall when the main door swung open with enough force to make several people turn. The man who entered was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days working under the Kansas sky. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell just past his collar, still damp as though he had recently washed. He wore clean denim trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days but was well maintained. His boots, though dusty, were good quality. But it was his face that caught Naomi's attention even from across the room. Strong jaw, straight nose, and eyes that seemed to take in everything with a quiet intelligence. "Well, well," Clara's voice carried again. "Looks like Philip Lawson finally decided to grace us with his presence. Probably came straight from the cattle pens." But there was something different in Clara's tone now, something calculating and interested. Naomi watched as several of the young women straightened their postures, touching their hair, adjusting their skirts. Even Margaret turned, her expression brightening considerably. Philip Lawson. Naomi knew the name, though she had never formally met the man. He owned a ranch about 10 miles outside of town, brought his cattle through Ellsworth on their way to market. From what she had heard, he was 30 years old, unmarried and successful despite his relatively young age. He kept to himself mostly, came to town only when necessary, and apparently attended dances even less frequently than that. His gaze swept the room, and Naomi found herself frozen as those dark eyes moved past her, then returned, holding for just a moment before moving on. She felt her breath catch. Had he been looking at her? No, surely not. He was probably looking at Clara, or one of the other pretty girls who were already positioning themselves in his line of sight. The fiddle struck up a new tune, a waltz, and Naomi watched as Thomas Perry approached Clara with an exaggerated bow. Clara took his hand, but her eyes remained on Philip, clearly hoping he might cut in later. Margaret was quickly claimed by Robert Jenkins, and soon the floor was full of swirling couples. Naomi turned toward the side door again, ready to make her escape. She had her hand on the doorknob when a deep voice spoke from behind her. "Excuse me, miss. I wonder if you might do me the honor of a dance." She froze, certain the words could not be meant for her. But when she turned slowly, Philip Lawson stood there, his hat in his hands, his expression serious and sincere. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a deep brown, almost black in the lamplight, and there was a small scar above his left eyebrow. He smelled of soap and leather, and something indefinably masculine that made her stomach flutter in a way she had never experienced. I think you have made a mistake," Naomi stammered, glancing around for whatever pretty girl he had surely meant to address. "No mistake," he said quietly. "I am asking you if you would like to dance." The room had not gone entirely silent, but Naomi was aware of the conversations dropping off nearby, of heads turning in their direction. She felt exposed, vulnerable, certain this was some kind of cruel joke. Men like Philip Lawson did not ask women like her to dance. They danced with the Claras and Margarets of the world, the delicate flowers who looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. Why? The word came out before she could stop it, blunt and suspicious. Something flickered across his face, gone too quickly for her to identify. "Because I would like to dance with you, but only if you want to. I will not force you onto the floor if you would rather not." His voice was calm, steady, without any hint of mockery. Naomi searched his face for signs of cruelty, for the smirk that would tell her this was all an elaborate setup for someone's amusement. She found none. He simply stood there, waiting, his posture relaxed but attentive. "I am not very good," she warned, though she did not know why she said it. She should refuse, save them both the embarrassment. But something in his eyes made her want to say yes, made her want to believe, just for a moment, that maybe she deserved this small kindness. "Neither am I," he admitted, and there might have been the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "We can be not very good together." It was the most absurd thing anyone had ever said to her, and before she knew what she was doing, Naomi found herself nodding. Philip's face brightened, just a fraction, and he extended his hand. She placed her smaller hand in his larger one, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as they gently closed around hers. He led her onto the floor, and Naomi was intensely aware of the stairs following them. She heard Clara's sharp intake of breath, Margaret's whispered comment to her partner. The music seemed too loud, her feet too clumsy, her body too large and ungainly. But then Philip's hand settled at her waist, proper but firm, and his other hand held hers with surprising gentleness, and they began to move. He was not an accomplished dancer, she realized quickly, but he was steady and sure-footed, guiding her through the steps with quiet confidence. He held her as though she was not too heavy, as though her weight was perfectly normal and acceptable. His hand at her waist did not grip too tight or hold her at a distance. He danced with her the way he might dance with anyone, with respect and attention. "You sew dresses," he said after a moment, not a question but a statement. "Yes," Naomi managed, surprised he knew. "I have a shop on Main Street. The blue house with the white trim. I have seen it. My sister mentioned you when she visited last year. Said you were the finest seamstress in 3 counties. Naomi blinked, processing this. "Your sister, Catherine. She married a man in Hayes City. She commissioned a dress from you for her wedding. Gray silk with pink roses." The memory surfaced immediately. Catherine Lawson, now Catherine Morris. She had been kind, easy to fit, effusive in her praise. She had paid twice what Naomi asked and insisted it was worth every penny. "I remember her," Naomi said. "She was very gracious. She wrote to me about you, said she had never met anyone with such skill, such an eye for detail. Said you made her feel beautiful on her wedding day." Philip guided her through a turn, and Naomi found herself following more easily than she had expected. "That dress you are wearing, you made it." Again, not a question. "Yes, it is well made. The color suits you. Brings out the blue in your eyes." Naomi's heart stuttered. No man had ever commented on her eyes, had ever noticed the way they shifted between blue and gray depending on the light. She did not know what to say, so she said nothing, just let him guide her across the floor while her mind spun. The waltz was not a long piece, but it felt both endless and far too brief. When the final notes faded, Philip stepped back, but he did not immediately release her hand. Instead, he looked at her with that same serious expression. "Thank you," he said simply. "That was the most pleasant dance I have had in a very long time." "You are welcome," Naomi whispered, finding her voice. "Thank you for asking me." He inclined his head, then escorted her back to where she had been standing, though not quite to the wall. He positioned her closer to the center of the room, in the light rather than the shadows. Then he did something that shocked her even more than the dance itself. He stayed. Philip did not ask another woman to dance. He did not circulate through the room making social conversation. He stood beside Naomi, occasionally commenting on the music or asking her about her work. When Thomas Perry approached, clearly intending to say something cutting, Philip's gaze shifted to him with such cold intensity that Thomas stuttered, changed his mind, and walked away. Clara attempted to engage him in conversation twice, but Philip responded with polite brevity before turning his attention back to Naomi, asking her opinion on whether the punch was too sweet, or if the fiddle player was as talented as his reputation suggested. It was perhaps the most surreal evening of Naomi's life. When the refreshment table was opened, Philip excused himself and returned with 2 cups of punch and a plate of small sandwiches. He had remembered to bring napkins, and when Naomi took a sandwich, she noticed he did not watch to see how much she ate, did not comment on her appetite or lack thereof. He simply ate his own sandwich and commented that the bread was fresh, probably from the bakery on 3rd Street. "You know the town well for someone who lives outside it," Naomi observed. "I grew up here," Philip explained. "My father owned the ranch before me. I spent my childhood running these streets, causing trouble like any boy. When my parents died 6 years ago, I took over the ranch. Cattle mostly, some horses. It keeps me busy." "I am sorry about your parents. Thank you. It was fever, took them both within a week of each other. At least they did not suffer long and they went together." He paused, looking down at his cup. "Catherine was already married by then, living in Hayes City. So it was just me." There was loneliness in those words, an echo of what Naomi felt in her own life. She understood what it was like to lose parents, to be alone in the world. Her mother had died of consumption, slowly and painfully, and Naomi had nursed her through those final terrible months. When it was over, she had been 19 years old with no other family, just her sewing skills and a desperate need to survive. "I lost my mother 5 years ago," Naomi said quietly. "She taught me to sew. We came from Ohio, hoping the drier air might help her breathing. It did not." Philip nodded slowly. "That is hard, to come so far and still lose her." "Yes." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, and Naomi realized she felt comfortable beside this man, more comfortable than she had felt around anyone in years. He did not seem to need constant chatter or entertainment. He was content to simply be present, to share space without demands or expectations. The evening progressed, and Philip asked her to dance twice more. Each time, Naomi was aware of the stares, the whispers, but somehow they seemed less important when she was moving across the floor with Philip's steady presence guiding her. She even found herself smiling, a real genuine smile that felt foreign after so many months of polite, professional expressions. When the dance finally ended near midnight, Philip offered to walk her home. Naomi almost refused out of habit, but something made her accept instead. They stepped out into the cool Kansas night, the sky vast and full of stars above them. Main Street was quiet, most of the businesses dark, only the saloon still showing light and noise at the far end of town. They walked slowly, neither seeming in a hurry to end the evening. Philip pointed out constellations, told her about a particularly stubborn bull that had broken through 3 fences last week, asked her about the process of making a dress from start to finish. He listened to her answers with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that showed he was paying attention. When they reached her house, Naomi found herself reluctant to go inside, to return to the solitude that usually felt like safety but tonight felt like loss. Philip stood on her doorstep, hat in hand again, his expression difficult to read in the darkness. "I enjoyed this evening very much," he said. "More than I can properly express. Would it be appropriate for me to call on you, perhaps on Sunday afternoon if you are not otherwise engaged?" Naomi's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. "You want to call on me?" "Very much." He hesitated, then added, "I should be honest with you, Miss Preston. I came to that dance tonight specifically hoping you might be there. Catherine has spoken of you so often in her letters. She thought we might suit each other. I am not a man who puts much stock in matchmaking, but I trusted her judgment enough to try. Having met you now, having spent this evening with you, I find I am very glad I listened to my sister." Naomi stared at him, trying to process this information. "Your sister was trying to match us." "She was. She is convinced we would be well suited. Something about both being creative and practical at once, both understanding loss and hard work. She can be quite insistent when she gets an idea in her head." He smiled slightly. "But I would not have approached you if I had not wanted to, matchmaking sister or no. The moment I saw you tonight, I knew she was right." "You saw me standing against the wall, trying to disappear," Naomi said before she could stop herself. "You saw exactly what everyone else saw." "No," Philip said firmly. "I saw a woman with kind eyes and skilled hands, wearing a dress she made herself because she has the talent to create beauty. I saw someone standing alone not because she wanted to, but because others were too foolish to appreciate what was right in front of them. I saw someone worth knowing." Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She did not cry, had not cried in years, had learned to bury that vulnerability deep where no one could use it against her. But his words, spoken with such simple sincerity, threatened to undo all her carefully constructed defenses. "Sunday afternoon would be lovely," she managed, her voice only slightly unsteady. "Perhaps around 2 o'clock I could make tea." "That sounds perfect." He replaced his hat, touching the brim in a small gesture of farewell. "Good night, Miss Preston. Sleep well." Good night, Mr. Lawson." She watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him down the street toward where he had presumably left his horse. Only when he disappeared from sight did she go inside, closing the door and leaning against it, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart still raced. The next morning, Naomi woke early despite having gone to bed late. She moved through her Sunday routine in a daze, attending church service and nodding politely to the few people who greeted her. She noticed Clara and Margaret whispering in their pew, shooting glances her way, but for once their opinions seemed distant and unimportant. Back home, she changed out of her church dress and into a simple gray day dress with cream-colored trim. She put the kettle on to boil, arranged the small parlor, and took out her mother's good china tea set. She had made cookies yesterday before the dance, sugar cookies with a hint of lemon. She arranged them on a plate, then rearranged them, then wondered if she should have made something else, something less plain. When the knock came at precisely 2 o'clock, Naomi nearly jumped out of her skin. She smoothed her dress, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, and opened the door. Philip stood on her doorstep looking scrubbed and neat in dark trousers and a clean blue shirt. He held his hat in one hand and a small bunch of wildflowers in the other, yellow and purple blooms that must have come from the prairie surrounding his ranch. "For you," he said, offering the flowers. "I would have gone to the florist, but these seemed more honest somehow. They grow wild and free, beautiful without trying to be." Naomi took the flowers, her fingers brushing his, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. "They are perfect. Thank you. Please come in." She led him into her small parlor, intensely aware of how modest her home was. The furniture was simple but well-maintained, the curtains she had sewn herself, the rug worn but clean. Her sewing machine occupied one corner, fabric folded neatly on shelves she had built from scrap wood. It was the home of someone who worked hard and made do, nothing fancy or impressive. But Philip looked around with apparent approval. "This is nice, comfortable. You can tell someone actually lives here, not like those sterile parlors that are just for show." Naomi found a vase for the flowers, arranged them quickly, and set them on the table. She poured tea, offered cookies, and then found herself sitting across from this man who had upended her orderly world in the space of one evening. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, because it seemed a safe topic, something that would keep him talking and give her time to settle her nerves. Philip described his land, the 160 acres of prairie and grazing land, the small house his father had built with his own hands, the barn that needed repairs every spring, the cattle that could be as stubborn as they were profitable. He talked about early mornings and late nights, about the satisfaction of hard work and the frustration of forces beyond his control like weather and market prices. "It sounds lonely," Naomi said when he paused, "being out there by yourself." "It is," he admitted. "I have 2 ranch hands who come during busy seasons, but most of the time it is just me. I like the work, like the land, but I will not pretend the solitude is always welcome. There are days when I come to town just to hear human voices, to remember what conversation feels like." "I understand that. My work is solitary too. Women come for fittings, but those are business transactions, not real connection. Sometimes I go days without speaking more than a few necessary words." Philip nodded, his eyes understanding. "Catherine warned me about that. She said I was in danger of becoming strange, isolated out there with only cows for company. She insisted I needed to make more effort to connect with people. Hence, the dance. And she specifically suggested you connect with me." She did. She said, and I quote, that you were the cleverest, kindest woman she had ever met, and that if I had any sense at all, I would stop being stubborn and meet you properly. He smiled. "Catherine has never been subtle. Naomi found herself smiling back. She was very kind to me. Many of my clients are not. They want the work but treat me as though I am invisible except when they need something. Your sister talked to me like I was a person, asked about my life, seemed genuinely interested in the answers. That is Catherine. She has this way of seeing people for who they really are, not what they appear to be or what position they hold. He took a sip of tea, then met Naomi's eyes directly. I should tell you plainly where I stand, Miss Preston. I am 30 years old, I own my land outright, and I make a decent living. I am not rich, but I am comfortable. I am looking for a wife, not because I need someone to cook and clean, I can manage that myself, but because I want a partner. Someone to share the work and the rewards, someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to build a life with. I know this is only our second meeting, and I am not proposing right now, but I believe in being honest about my intentions from the start. If you have no interest in that kind of future, I would rather know now before either of us invests more time and emotion. His directness was startling but also refreshing. Naomi appreciated that he was not playing games, not leading her on or leaving her to guess at his meaning. She took a moment to consider her response, wanting to be equally honest. I am 23 years old, she said carefully. I own my business and this house, small as it is. I make a decent living. I have never been courted before last night, never had a man show interest in me romantically. I assumed I would spend my life alone, focused on my work. I am not opposed to marriage, to partnership, but I need you to understand that I am not what most men want. I am not delicate or small or conventionally pretty. I am large, and while I am healthy and strong, I know that my size is something people notice and comment on and often mock. If you are courting me because you feel sorry for me, or because your sister suggested it and you are too polite to refuse, I would rather you stop now. Philip set down his teacup with deliberate care. May I speak bluntly? Please do. I do not feel sorry for you. Sympathy is not an emotion that builds lasting relationships. What I feel is respect for your skill and accomplishment, curiosity about your mind and your perspectives, and attraction to you as a woman. Yes, you are larger than some women. You are also confident in your abilities, intelligent in your conversation, and beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with being small or delicate. The women at that dance last night, the ones who mocked you, they have pretty faces and tiny waists, but they also have cruel hearts and shallow minds. I have no interest in them. I am interested in you. Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks. You barely know me. That is true. Which is why I am here, hoping to know you better, hoping you might want to know me better too. He leaned forward slightly. I am not a romantic man by nature, Miss Preston. I am practical, sometimes too much so, but I know what I am looking for and I recognize it when I see it. I see it in you. If I am wrong, if there is no possibility of affection between us, then we will discover that as we spend time together. But I would like the chance to find out. It was perhaps the most extraordinary conversation Naomi had ever had. No dancing around the subject, no coy games or false modesty. Just two people being honest about what they wanted and asking if those wants might align. It should have been uncomfortable, but instead it felt liberating. I would like to know you better too, she said quietly. I enjoyed last night more than I can express. The idea of your company, of having someone to talk to, someone who sees me as a person rather than just the seamstress or the woman people mock, that sounds wonderful. But I am also cautious. I have learned to protect myself, to expect disappointment. I need you to be patient with that. I can be patient, Philip assured her. I spend my days with cattle. Patience is essential. That startled a laugh out of her, surprising them both. The tension in the room eased, and they spent the next 2 hours talking about everything and nothing. Naomi told him about growing up in Ohio, about her father who had died when she was young, about learning to sew at her mother's knee. Philip told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father teaching him to ride and rope, about the year he spent in Abilene learning the cattle business before coming home to help his parents. They discovered they both loved reading, though their choices differed. He preferred practical books about ranching and animal husbandry, while she loved novels, particularly those with strong female characters who overcame adversity. They both enjoyed music, but neither could play an instrument. They both valued hard work and independence, but acknowledged the loneliness that sometimes accompanied self-sufficiency. When Philip finally stood to leave, the afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, painting the parlor in gold. He thanked her for the tea, told her he would like to call again next Sunday if that was agreeable, and then did something that made her heart stutter. He took her hand in both of his, raised it to his lips, and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until next week, Miss Preston." "Until then, Mr. Lawson." After he left, Naomi stood in her parlor feeling as though the world had tilted on its axis. One dance, 2 conversations, and suddenly her future looked entirely different from what she had imagined. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The week that followed was strange. Word had apparently spread about Philip dancing with her, about him walking her home, about him calling on her on Sunday. Women who had never deigned to speak to her beyond business matters suddenly found reasons to stop by the dress shop. Their questions thinly veiled attempts to gather information. Clara came in on Tuesday, ostensibly to pick up a skirt she had ordered. "So," she said with false sweetness, "I hear Philip Lawson has taken an interest in you. How unexpected." Naomi kept her expression neutral as she wrapped the skirt in brown paper. "Is it?" "Well, yes. I mean, he could have any woman in the county. Some people are saying he must have lost a bet or something, that he was dared to dance with you." The words were designed to hurt, and they did, landing like small sharp stones against Naomi's composure. But she had years of practice hiding her reactions, so she simply tied the string around the package and handed it across the counter. "That will be $2. Clara's expression soured at the lack of response. She paid, snatched her package, and left with a swish of skirts. The moment the door closed, Naomi allowed herself to sink onto the stool behind the counter, her hands shaking slightly. Was that what people thought? That Philip was fulfilling a dare, playing some cruel joke? The doubt crept in despite her best efforts to keep it at bay. He had been so sincere, but men could be good actors when they wanted to be. What if this was all some elaborate prank? But then she remembered the way he had looked at her, the gentle pressure of his hand at her waist, his directness when discussing his intentions. Those things seemed too genuine to be false, unless she was simply so desperate for affection that she was willing to believe anything. The doubt plagued her for days, making her anxious and uncertain. She jumped at every sound, half expecting Philip to appear with an audience, to reveal that it had all been a joke. When Sunday came, she was so nervous she considered pretending to be away, hiding in her house with the curtains drawn, but 2 o'clock arrived, and so did Philip, punctual as before. This time he brought a book he thought she might enjoy, a collection of short stories by an author she had mentioned liking. He had ridden to Hayes City midweek specifically to find it, a 3-hour journey each way. "I thought you might not have read this one," he said, handing it to her. The bookseller said it was his most recent publication. Naomi took the book, running her fingers over the embossed cover, and felt the doubt begin to crumble. A man did not ride 6 hours to buy a book for a woman as part of a joke. That level of effort spoke to genuine interest. genuine care. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is incredibly thoughtful." They fell into a pattern over the following weeks. Philip came to town every Sunday, spent the afternoon with her, talking and learning about each other. He invited her to the ranch, and she went, riding in his wagon over dirt roads, seeing the land he loved. The ranch house was small but sturdy, built with care and maintained with pride. He showed her his cattle, introduced her to his horses, explained his plans for expanding the herd. "It is not fancy," he said, almost apologetically as they stood on the small porch looking out over the prairie. "But it is home. I have thought about building something larger, but it seemed pointless when it was just me. Now, though—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Now he was thinking about a future with someone else. With her. Naomi felt something unfold in her chest, something warm and bright and fragile. She was falling in love with this man, with his quiet strength and practical nature, with the way he treated her like she mattered. It was terrifying because love made you vulnerable, and vulnerability could be weaponized. But it was also wonderful because, for the first time in her life, she felt seen and valued for who she truly was. In late July, Philip asked if he could court her officially. They were sitting on her porch in the evening, watching the sun set, when he turned to her with that serious expression she had come to recognize. "Miss Preston, Naomi, I know we have been seeing each other for several weeks now, but I would like to make my intentions formal. I am courting you with the aim of marriage. I want everyone in this town to know that I am serious about you, that you are not some passing interest but the woman I intend to spend my life with, if you are willing." Naomi's throat felt tight. "Yes, I am willing." He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face into something approaching joy. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to refuse, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and careful, a question as much as an action. Naomi had never been kissed before, had no experience to guide her, but she followed instinct and kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Philip rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to marry you, Naomi Preston. If you will have me." "That sounds like a very good plan," she whispered. The formal courtship made things both easier and harder. Easier because Philip's intentions were clear, because she could acknowledge her feelings without fear, because she had every reason to believe this was real and lasting. Harder because the gossip increased, because Clara and her friends became more openly hostile, because some people seemed personally offended that someone like Philip would choose someone like Naomi. There was an incident in late August that nearly broke her composure. She was shopping at the general store when she overheard two women talking in the next aisle. "It is disgraceful," one said. "A man like Philip Lawson, he could have any woman he wanted, and he settles for that fat seamstress. What is he thinking? Maybe she bewitched him somehow. Used some kind of spell or potion." They both laughed, and Naomi stood frozen between the shelves, her basket heavy on her arm. She wanted to walk away, to ignore them as she had ignored countless cruel comments before. But something in her refused to keep silent this time. She walked around the shelf and faced the two women, both of whom had the grace to look startled. "Good morning, ladies. I could not help but overhear your conversation. I just wanted to assure you that I have not bewitched anyone. Philip Lawson is courting me because he chooses to, because he sees value in me as a person. I am sorry if that offends you, but his choices are his own, and he seems quite capable of making them without magical intervention." She turned and walked to the counter, paid for her purchases, and left with her head high. But once she was back in her shop, door locked, she sank into her chair and let herself shake. The cruelty should not still hurt after all these years, but it did. It always did. That evening, Philip came by unexpectedly. She answered the door with swollen eyes, trying to hide that she had been crying. He took one look at her face and his expression darkened. "What happened?" "Nothing. I am fine. Naomi." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Please tell me what happened." So she did, haltingly, embarrassed by her own weakness. When she finished, Philip was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. "Give me names." "What?" "Tell me who said those things. I will speak to them." "No," Naomi said quickly. "That will only make it worse. People will say I am sending you to fight my battles, that I am manipulating you. Please, just let it be." Philip looked like he wanted to argue, but he finally nodded. "All right, I will not confront them, but I want you to know something. Those women, and anyone else who thinks like them, they do not matter. Their opinions are worth less than dust. You are brilliant and talented and beautiful, and I am the luckiest man in Kansas that you have agreed to let me court you. If anyone suggests otherwise, they are either blind or jealous or both. You think I am beautiful," the words slipped out, vulnerable and uncertain. "I know you are beautiful." He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs gentle on her cheeks. "You are beautiful when you are concentrating on your sewing, with that little line between your eyebrows. You are beautiful when you laugh at something I say. You are beautiful right now, even upset. Beauty is not just bone structure and body size. It is energy and spirit and the light you bring into the world. And by that measure, you are the most beautiful woman I have ever known." Naomi felt tears spill over, but these were different from the earlier tears of hurt. These were tears of relief, of being seen, of being loved for who she truly was. Philip pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean against his solid strength, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. In September, Philip officially proposed. He did not make a grand public gesture, did not arrange some elaborate scenario. Instead, he came to her house on a Sunday afternoon, got down on one knee in her parlor, and offered her a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Naomi Preston, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, the person I build a life with? I promise to honor you, to respect you, to love you as you deserve to be loved. I promise to stand beside you against anyone who tries to diminish you. I promise to be faithful and true for all the days of my life. Will you have me?" "Yes," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Then he stood and kissed her, and Naomi felt the last of her defenses crumble. She loved this man completely, trusted him utterly, and she was going to marry him. They set the date for late October, after the harvest and before winter set in. Naomi sewed her own wedding dress, naturally, a creation of cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. She made it to fit her body properly, to flatter her figure without trying to hide it or apologize for it. When she looked at herself in the mirror on the morning of her wedding, she saw a woman who was loved, and that made all the difference. The wedding was small, held in the church with only a few guests. Catherine had come from Hayes City with her husband, delighted that her matchmaking had been so successful. The pastor, who had known Naomi since she arrived in Ellsworth, performed the ceremony. A few townspeople attended, some out of genuine goodwill, others probably out of curiosity. Clara and Margaret were not invited. Naomi walked down the aisle alone, carrying a bouquet of prairie flowers Philip had picked that morning. When she reached the front of the church and saw him standing there in his best suit, his face full of love and certainty, she felt a peace settle over her. This was right. This was real. This was the beginning of the life she had never thought she would have. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They spoke their vows clearly, their voices steady, their eyes locked on each other. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Philip kissed her gently, then more firmly, and the small gathering applauded. They were married. They were partners. They were together. The reception was held at the town hall, the same place where they had first danced. Someone had decorated with autumn leaves and wildflowers. There was food and music, and when the fiddle struck up a waltz, Philip led Naomi onto the floor for their first dance as husband and wife. "Remember that night," he murmured as they moved across the floor. "I was so nervous approaching you, I thought you might refuse." "I almost did," Naomi admitted. "I thought it was a trick." "I am glad you took the chance." He smiled down at her. "I am glad I took the chance too." They danced 3 more times, and then they said their goodbyes and climbed into Philip's wagon for the ride back to the ranch. It was home now, Naomi's home, and the thought filled her with both excitement and nervousness. She had closed the dress shop temporarily, though she planned to continue taking special commissions. Her life was changing in every possible way. The ranch house was small, but Philip had spent weeks preparing it for her arrival. He had built new shelves for her books, cleared space for a sewing table near the window with the best light, even attempted to make curtains though they were decidedly crooked. Naomi felt her heart melt at the evidence of his efforts. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and lovely. Neither of them had much experience, but they had affection and patience and a willingness to learn. Philip was gentle, constantly checking that she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. Naomi had been anxious about her body, about disappointing him, but he touched her with reverence, told her she was perfect, made her feel desired in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterwards, lying in bed with his arm around her, Naomi felt a contentment so profound it was almost frightening. She had spent so much of her life expecting disappointment that happiness felt fragile, as though it might shatter if she held it too tightly. "What are you thinking?" Philip asked, his voice drowsy. "That I am happy, that I did not know I could feel this way." He kissed her forehead. "Get used to it. I plan to make you happy for the rest of our lives." They fell asleep tangled together, and Naomi did not have a single nightmare. Life on the ranch was an adjustment. Naomi was used to living alone, to quiet days focused on her work. Now there was a partnership to navigate, a household to run alongside a man with his own routines and preferences. But they approached it the same way they approached everything, with honest communication and mutual respect. Philip taught her to ride properly, not just sitting in a wagon but actually controlling a horse. She was nervous at first, certain she was too heavy, but the mare Philip chose for her was steady and strong, unbothered by her weight. Naomi found she enjoyed riding, enjoyed the freedom of moving across the prairie with the wind in her face. She taught Philip to cook more than basic beans and bacon, to make bread that did not turn out like rocks, to appreciate the comfort of a well-made home. She continued to sew, making clothes for both of them, taking occasional commissions from women willing to travel out to the ranch. Catherine sent regular customers her way, spreading the word that Naomi's skills were worth the journey. They worked together, Philip handling the cattle and heavy labor, Naomi managing the household and her sewing business. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch if weather permitted, or by the fire when winter came, talking about their day, making plans for the future, simply enjoying each other's presence. The first winter was hard. Not because of their marriage that remained solid and good, but because of the isolation. Snow fell heavy in late December, and they were sometimes snowed in for days at a time. Food ran low. The cattle struggled. Philip worked brutal hours trying to keep the animals alive, coming in exhausted and half frozen. Naomi heated water for baths, made hot meals, mended his clothes when they tore, did everything she could to support him. There was one terrible night when a blizzard hit and Philip had to go out to check on the cattle. He was gone for hours, and Naomi paced the small house, sick with worry. When he finally stumbled in, so cold he could barely speak, she had to help him out of his frozen clothes and into a hot bath. She sat beside the tub, crying with relief that he was alive, furious that he had risked himself, understanding that he had no choice because the cattle were their livelihood. "Do not ever scare me like that again," she said fiercely. "I will try not to," he replied through chattering teeth. "But Naomi, this is the life. This is what ranching means. Danger and risk and fighting against nature. If you cannot handle that, I need to know now." "I can handle it," she said firmly. "I just need you to come back to me every time. That is all I ask. Come back." "I will always come back to you," he promised. They made it through that winter, and when spring came with its renewal and warmth, it felt like a victory. The cattle had survived mostly. They had lost about 10% of the herd, which Philip said was actually better than average for such a harsh winter. The grass greened, the wildflowers bloomed, and life felt full of possibility again. In April, Naomi realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but it was not until she could no longer deny the signs that she told Philip. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately set her down and apologized for being too rough. "I am not made of glass," she said, amused. "Pregnant women do not break from being spun. I know, we are going to have a baby. Naomi, we are going to be parents. I know. Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her close, his hand already moving to rest protectively on her stomach, even though there was no visible sign yet. "You are going to be an amazing mother." The pregnancy was mostly uneventful, though Naomi found she was tired more easily, and certain smells made her nauseous. Philip fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest, bringing her whatever she needed, generally being so attentive that she sometimes had to gently tell him to back off a bit. Catherine visited in July, bringing baby clothes she had sewn and advice about childbirth that was both helpful and terrifying. Their son was born in late November, a week after Naomi's 25th birthday. The labor was long and difficult, attended by the midwife from town and Catherine, who had come to stay for the birth. Philip paced outside the bedroom, not allowed in but clearly suffering his own form of agony listening to Naomi's pain. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and healthy, the midwife brought him out to meet his father before taking him back to be cleaned up. Philip held his son with such tender awe that Naomi, exhausted and in pain in the next room, heard Catherine describe it and felt her heart overflow. They named him James, after Philip's father. He was a solid baby, healthy and loud, with dark hair like his father and blue eyes that might have come from either of them. Philip was besotted immediately, holding his son every chance he got, talking to him even though James was far too young to understand. "You are going to help me run this ranch someday," Philip told the baby seriously. "But first you have to learn to walk and talk and ride. Your mother and I will teach you everything. You are going to have a good life, James. I promise you that." Naomi recovered slowly from the birth, her body needing time to heal. Philip took over more of the household duties, hired a girl from town to help with the heavy work, did everything possible to make things easier. It was during those weeks that Naomi fully understood the depth of his commitment, his love. He did not complain about the extra work or the disruption to their routine. He simply did what needed doing, cared for his wife and son, and seemed grateful for the opportunity. James was 6 months old when they had their first real fight. It was about something stupid. Naomi could not even remember what later, but tensions had been building. Sleepless nights with a teething baby, worry about drought affecting the grazing land, the constant demands of work and parenthood. It all accumulated until they snapped at each other over some trivial matter. Philip said something harsh about her being oversensitive. Naomi fired back that he was being insensitive and distant. The argument escalated until they were both saying things they did not mean, until Naomi was crying and Philip was angry, until they went to bed on opposite sides, not touching, both miserable. In the morning, Philip apologized first. "I was wrong. I was tired and worried and I took it out on you. That was unfair and unkind. I am sorry." "I am sorry too," Naomi said quietly. "I said things I did not mean. We are both exhausted and stressed, but we cannot turn on each other. We are supposed to be partners." "You are right. We are partners. Whatever happens, whatever stress we face it together, not by attacking each other." He took her hand. "Can we agree that when things get hard, we talk about it before it builds up to a fight?" "Yes, I would like that." They talked for an hour. Really talked about their fears and frustrations, about the challenges of balancing parenthood and work, about feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. It was not a comfortable conversation, but it was necessary, and they came out of it stronger. As James grew, the ranch prospered. Philip expanded the herd, built a new barn, hired permanent ranch hands to help with the work. Naomi continued her sewing, though at a reduced pace, taking only the most lucrative commissions. Money was not abundant, but it was sufficient. They were building something solid. When James was 3, they had a daughter. Mary came easier than James had, the labor shorter, the recovery quicker. She looked like Naomi, with lighter hair and the same blue-gray eyes. Philip loved her just as fiercely as he loved James, and watching him with their children, Naomi sometimes felt overwhelmed by gratitude for this life she had built. James adored his little sister, at least most of the time. He would bring her toys, try to make her laugh, help Naomi care for her. Philip built him a small pony cart so he could help with light ranch work, and James took his responsibilities very seriously. Even at 3 years old, they had been married 5 years when Clara showed up at the ranch. Naomi was in the garden with Mary while James helped Philip in the barn. She looked up to see a wagon approaching and recognized Clara driving, alone. Naomi stood, brushing dirt from her skirts, and waited. She had not spoken to Clara since before the wedding, had heard through town gossip that Clara had married a merchant in Hayes City. Apparently that had not worked out. Clara climbed down from the wagon, and Naomi was struck by how diminished she looked. The confidence and cruelty that had once defined her seemed eroded, leaving someone uncertain and smaller. "Naomi," Clara said, "I hope I am not intruding." "That depends on why you are here." Naomi kept her voice neutral. She did not owe this woman kindness, but she could manage civility. "I wanted to apologize." Clara spoke quickly, as though afraid she would lose courage, "for how I treated you, for the things I said, the cruelty I showed. It was inexcusable. You did not deserve any of it, and I am sorry." Naomi studied her for a long moment. "Why now? It has been 5 years. Because my life fell apart, and I finally understand what it feels like to be judged and mocked and cast aside." Clara's voice cracked. "My husband left me for another woman, said I was too shallow, too focused on appearances. I came back to Ellsworth with nothing, and now I am the one people whisper about. And I realized that I did to you what is now being done to me, except you never deserved it, and I probably do." "No one deserves to be treated with cruelty," Naomi said quietly. "Not even you." Clara looked surprised, then burst into tears. Naomi stood there, unsure what to do, then finally gestured to the porch. "Would you like some water? Tea?" They sat on the porch, Mary playing at their feet, and Clara poured out her story. The hasty marriage to a man she thought could give her status, the slow realization that he did not love her, the humiliation of being abandoned, the return to Ellsworth where everyone knew her failure. It was pitiful and sad, and Naomi found herself feeling compassion despite everything. "I do not know what to do," Clara admitted. "I have no skills, no money. My parents are taking me in, but they are disappointed and barely speak to me. I just feel so lost." "You could learn a skill," Naomi suggested. "You are smart enough when you choose to be. Is there anything you are interested in?" Clara laughed bitterly. "I have only ever cared about looking pretty and catching a husband. A lot of good that did me." "It is not too late to care about other things, to become more than you were." Naomi surprised herself with the offer but made it anyway. "I could teach you sewing if you wanted, basic mending to start, then perhaps more. It is honest work and there is always demand." Clara stared at her. "After everything I did to you, you would help me. I believe people can change. If you are willing to work, to truly learn and not just play at it, I will teach you." Naomi paused. "But I will not tolerate cruelty or gossip. You want my help, you treat everyone with respect. That is the condition." "I can do that," Clara said quickly. "I will do that. Thank you, Naomi, thank you so much." Philip was skeptical when Naomi told him later. "You sure about this? She made your life miserable, I know, but people can change and everyone deserves a second chance. If she proves me wrong, I will send her away, but I want to believe she can be better." "You have a bigger heart than I do," Philip said, pulling her close. "That is one of the many reasons I love you." Clara came to the ranch twice a week for lessons. She was clumsy at first, her fingers unused to the precise work, but she was determined. She learned quickly, asked good questions, and true to her word, treated everyone with respect. Over months, something like friendship began to form, cautious and tentative but real. James started school when he turned 6, riding into town with Philip several days a week. He was bright and curious, loved reading like his mother but also loved the ranch work like his father. Mary was 3, talkative and energetic, following Naomi everywhere, constantly asking questions. Life continued its steady rhythm. Good years and hard years, dry summers and harsh winters, the constant work of the ranch and household. Philip's hair started showing gray at his temples. Naomi found she needed reading glasses for close sewing work. They were getting older, but they were getting older together. When they had been married 10 years, Philip arranged a surprise for their anniversary. He had hired hands to watch the ranch and the children, and he took Naomi to Hayes City for a weekend. They stayed in a hotel, ate in a restaurant, attended a concert. It was a rare break from responsibility, a chance to focus only on each other. On their last evening, walking back to the hotel under streetlights, Philip took her hand. "You know what I remember most about our wedding day?" "What?" "The look on your face when you walked down the aisle. Like you could not quite believe it was happening, like you were afraid it might disappear. And I wanted to run to you to tell you that it was real, that I was not going anywhere." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "It has been 10 years, and I hope you believe it now. I am not going anywhere. This is forever." "I believe it," Naomi said, and she did. The insecurity that had once defined her had faded, worn away by years of steady love and partnership. "You are stuck with me, Philip Lawson. Best thing that ever happened to me." They had one more child, a daughter named Catherine after Philip's sister, born when Naomi was 32. It was their last child, both of them feeling that 3 was the right number, that their family was complete. Catherine was a surprise baby, unexpected but welcome, and she completed the pattern of their life. James grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and already talked about taking it over someday. Mary was all sunshine and laughter, making friends with every person she met. Little Catherine was too young yet to show her personality, but she was alert and healthy and loved. Clara eventually opened her own small sewing shop in town, specializing in mending and alterations. She never became Naomi's close friend. The history between them was too complicated for that, but they maintained a cordial professional relationship built on mutual respect. Clara never married again, but she seemed content with her work and her independence. The years passed. James took over more of the ranch work as Philip's back started bothering him. Mary announced at 15 that she wanted to be a teacher and started studying seriously for the teaching examination. Catherine followed Naomi around, learning to sew, showing the same natural talent her mother possessed. When Naomi was 40, she and Philip attended another town dance, the first they had been to in years. It was held in the same hall where they had met 18 years earlier. The building had been renovated, but the bones were the same. "Remember that night?" Philip asked as they entered. "I was so nervous my hands were shaking. I almost did not come. I was standing outside debating whether to just go home." Naomi smiled at the memory. "I am glad I did not. So am I." He offered his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Lawson?" "Always, Mr. Lawson." They moved onto the floor, and Naomi felt the eyes of the room on them, but the attention felt different now. They were established, respected, a successful couple that had built a good life together. No one mocked the seamstress anymore. She was Mrs. Philip Lawson, mother of 3, talented dressmaker, and beloved wife. As they waltzed across the floor, Naomi remembered that first dance. How uncertain and terrified she had been, how Philip's steady presence had made her feel safe. Now she moved with confidence, comfortable in his arms, knowing exactly where she belonged. "What are you thinking?" Philip asked, echoing the question he had asked so many times over their years together. "That I am happy. That I am exactly where I am supposed to be." He pulled her a little closer, proper but affectionate. "Me too. Every single day, me too." The music swelled, carrying them through the dance, and Naomi closed her eyes, letting herself feel the fullness of her life. She had been the girl mocked at the dance, the woman who thought she would always be alone. And then a cowboy had asked her to waltz, and everything had changed. She opened her eyes and looked up at Philip, still handsome despite the gray in his hair, still strong despite the years of hard work. He smiled down at her, and in that smile she saw their entire life together, past and future. All the days they had shared and all the days yet to come. The dance ended, but they stayed on the floor, waiting for the next song to begin. They would dance several more times tonight, would eventually go home to their children and their life. But for now, they were simply 2 people in love, moving across the floor in perfect synchronization, partners in every sense of the word. James was 19 when he announced he wanted to marry Annie Fletcher, a girl from town whose father owned the feed store. Philip and Naomi attended the wedding, watched their son take his vows, and felt the bittersweet joy of seeing him begin his own life. James and Annie built a small house on the ranch property, and James took over more of the daily operations, letting Philip gradually retire from the hardest physical labor. Mary passed her teaching examination at 18 and got a position at the Ellsworth schoolhouse. She boarded in town during the week and came home on weekends, full of stories about her students and the challenges of teaching. She was courted by several young men but showed no interest in settling down yet, too focused on her career. Catherine, at 15, was already taking commissions for wedding dresses, her skills surpassing what Naomi had achieved at that age. She talked about opening a shop in Abilene or even Wichita, making a name for herself beyond Ellsworth. Naomi encouraged her daughter's ambitions while also feeling the melancholy of knowing she would eventually leave, Philip and Naomi were in their late 40s now, no longer young but not yet old. Philip's hair was more gray than brown, his face lined by sun and wind. Naomi had laugh lines around her eyes, a few silver threads in her hair. Her body had changed over the years, shaped by 3 pregnancies and decades of life, but Philip still looked at her the way he had that first night at the dance, with appreciation and desire. They had been married 23 years when Philip had a scare. He was working with James, moving cattle, when his horse stumbled and threw him. He landed hard, cracking several ribs and spraining his wrist badly. The doctor said he was lucky it was not worse, that a man his age needed to be more careful. Naomi nursed him through recovery, lecturing him about taking unnecessary risks, crying when he was asleep because she had been so frightened when James came to get her, when she had seen Philip lying on the ground in pain. The accident reminded them both that life was fragile, that their time together, however long it might be, was precious. "I am not ready to lose you," Naomi said one night as they lay in bed, Philip still moving carefully because of his ribs. "You are not going to lose me. I am too stubborn to die from falling off a horse." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "We still have years ahead of us, Naomi. Years of grandchildren and watching our kids build their own lives. Years of sitting on the porch and complaining about our aching joints. I am not going anywhere. Promise. Promise." James and Annie had their first child the following spring, a boy they named Philip after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Philip Lawson Sr. had tears in his eyes, overwhelmed by the continuation of their family. The knowledge that the life he and Naomi had built would extend beyond them. Mary got engaged when she was 24 to a fellow teacher from Abilene, a serious young man named Robert Porter who clearly adored her. They married in a small ceremony and moved to Abilene together, both teaching at the same school. Mary promised to visit often, and she kept that promise, bringing Robert home several times a year. Catherine did open a shop in Wichita when she turned 20, partnering with another seamstress and quickly building a reputation for quality work. She came home for holidays and special occasions, always bearing gifts she had made, always full of stories about city life. Philip and Naomi adjusted to having the house to themselves again after years of children underfoot. It was quiet, sometimes too quiet, but they fell back into the rhythm of being just the two of them, the foundation on which their family had been built. They were in their mid-50s when Philip officially retired from ranching, turning over full control to James. Philip kept busy with smaller projects, building things, writing, spending time with his grandchildren who now numbered 4. Naomi continued sewing, though mostly for pleasure now, creating intricate quilts and special occasion pieces. One evening, sitting on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before, Philip turned to Naomi with a contemplative expression. "Do you ever think about that night at the dance? The night we met, sometimes. Why?" "I was just thinking about how one decision, one moment of courage can change everything. If I had not gone to that dance, if I had not asked you to waltz, our entire lives would be different. James, Mary, Catherine, none of them would exist. This life we built, this family, it all came from one dance." Naomi considered this. "I was about to leave. I was standing at the door, ready to go home. If you had approached me 30 seconds later, I would have been gone." 30 seconds, Philip repeated, shaking his head. "That is how close we came to missing each other entirely. But we did not miss each other. You did ask me to dance. I did stay, and we built all of this." Naomi gestured to encompass the ranch, the life around them. "I do not believe in fate exactly, but I believe that we were meant to find each other. Somehow, some way, we would have connected. Maybe, or maybe we just got incredibly lucky. I prefer to think of it as blessed. Naomi took his hand, still loving the feel of his calloused palm against hers. Blessed to have found you, to have built this life, to have loved and been loved so completely. Philip raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles the way he had done so many times over their decades together. I am the blessed one. You gave me everything I never knew I was missing. You made my life complete. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Closer by, they could hear James and Annie putting their children to bed in the house James had built. The ranch would continue beyond them, their legacy carried forward by children and grandchildren, who would never know the loneliness that had once defined both Philip and Naomi. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Naomi leaned against Philip's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, solid and warm and real. They had been married for over 30 years now, had weathered every challenge that life threw at them, had built something beautiful and lasting from a single dance. I love you, she said quietly. I do not say it enough, but I do. I love you so much. I love you too, Philip replied, his voice deep and certain. Every day, Naomi. Every single day. They stayed on the porch until the sky was fully dark and the air grew cool, reluctant to go inside, wanting to hold onto the peaceful perfection of the moment. Finally, Philip stood and offered his hand, pulling Naomi to her feet. Dance with me, he said suddenly. There is no music. We do not need music. We never really needed anything but each other. So there, on their porch under the stars, Philip and Naomi danced. It was slow and simple, just swaying together, but it held echoes of every dance they had shared over the years, from that first waltz in Ellsworth, to their wedding dance, to countless evenings in their parlor when the work was done and the children were asleep. As they moved together, Naomi thought about the girl she had been, standing against the wall, trying to disappear. She thought about the courage it had taken to place her hand in Philip's and step onto that floor. She thought about all the moments since, the joys and sorrows, the ordinary days and extraordinary ones, all of it woven together into a life worth living. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me. For asking me to waltz. For giving me this life. Philip pulled back just enough to look at her face, his eyes full of love. You gave me this life too. We gave it to each other. That is what partnership means. He was right, as he so often was. They had built this together, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. One person had not rescued the other. They had met as equals, both lonely, both longing for connection, and they had chosen each other. They had kept choosing each other through every challenge, every change, every season of their lives. The music that was not really playing came to an end, and they stopped dancing, but they did not let go of each other. They stood on their porch, holding each other under the vast Kansas sky. Two people who had found love in the most unexpected way and had nurtured it into something strong and enduring. Inside, the house waited, warm and welcoming, filled with the evidence of their life together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every tomorrow did. But tonight they had this moment, this perfect completion of the circle that had begun when a cowboy asked a seamstress to waltz. They finally went inside, hand in hand, closing the door on the night. The ranch settled into darkness around them, the cattle quiet, the land at peace. And in the small house that Philip's father had built so many years ago, Philip and Naomi Lawson prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine of a partnership so long established, it was as natural as breathing. They lay down together, and Naomi curled into Philip's side the way she had done for over 3 decades. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close, and she felt his breath even out as he began to drift towards sleep. "Philip," she whispered, not sure if he was still awake. "I am glad you asked me to dance." She felt rather than saw his smile in the darkness. "Me too, Naomi, me too." They fell asleep like that, together as they had been for most of their adult lives, partners in every sense, two people who had taken a chance on each other and built something beautiful. The seamstress who had been mocked and the cowboy who had seen her worth had become so much more than their beginning. They had become each other's home, each other's safe harbor, each other's great love. And as the years continued to unfold, as grandchildren became great-grandchildren, as the ranch prospered and the family grew, that love remained the foundation of everything. It was not always easy or perfect. They had disagreements and hard days, times when life tested them. But they faced it all together, never forgetting that first dance, that first choice, that first moment of courage that had changed everything. Philip lived to be 78 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep after a full and well-lived life. Naomi held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke, she was grateful for every single day they had shared. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, still sewing when her hands allowed, still telling stories about the cowboy who had asked her to waltz. When Naomi died at 83, she was buried beside Philip under a tree they had planted together 50 years earlier. Their graves were marked with simple stones bearing their names, dates, and a single inscription: partners in life and love, together in eternity. The ranch continued under James and his sons. Mary's descendants became teachers and scholars. Catherine's line produced artists and craftspeople. And all of them carried forward the story of their great-grandparents, the seamstress and the cowboy who had found each other against all odds and built a love that lasted a lifetime. In Ellsworth, Kansas, where it had all begun, people still occasionally mentioned Naomi and Philip Lawson, remembering them as one of the great love stories of the town's history. The dance hall where they met was eventually torn down and replaced with a newer building, but old-timers would point to the spot and tell newcomers about the night a brave cowboy asked an overlooked seamstress to dance, and how that single act of kindness and courage had bloomed into something extraordinary. Because that is what love does. It sees worth where others see nothing. It offers a hand when everyone else turns away. It asks someone to dance when they have been standing alone. And if we are very lucky, if we are brave enough to accept that offered hand and step onto the floor despite our fear, it transforms us into our best and truest selves. Naomi and Philip's story was not about rescue or salvation. It was about recognition and choice. He recognized her value and she chose to believe him. She recognized his loneliness and he chose to share his life with her. Together, they created something neither could have built alone: a family, a legacy, a love that outlasted them both and rippled forward through generations. Their story began with a waltz and ended with a lifetime of partnership. And in between, in all those ordinary days and extraordinary moments, they proved that love is not about perfection or meeting society's standards. Love is about seeing someone truly, accepting them completely, and choosing them daily. It is about partnership and respect and building something together that is greater than either person alone. The obese seamstress was mocked at the dance, until the cowboy asked her to waltz. But what happened after that first dance? That was the real story. That was where a moment became a lifetime, where courage became love, where two lonely people became a family. That was where everything that mattered truly began.